Welcome to our second EdTech Monday Uganda, brought to you by the Mastercard Foundation in partnership with the Innovation Village through the EdTech Lab. The EdTech Monday Uganda is the country version of EdTech Monday Africa, a platform to engage Uganda's EdTech community and other relevant stakeholders, including the government and private sector, on the emerging topics of education and how technology can address any of these challenges. EdTech Monday will be held once a month as we dissect the education sector and the future of education and the available opportunities to grow that sector. This month, we particularly have a conversation on Digi learning. Can education technology address and expand the access to education? And joining me in studio is an elite panel to discuss this. I want us to introduce ourselves, I think starting with you, Catherine, and we get to know Stella. Yes.
Thank you very much. I am Catherine Opondo. I am the Executive Director for Concern for the Girl Child, and I'm privileged to be a part of this panel.
What does Concern for the Girl Child do?
Concern for the Girl Child takes care and interest in the girl child, particularly education, healthcare, and child protection.
All right, thank you so much. Ronald?
Thank you, Raymond. I'm Ronald Zawahinja. I am the Chief Technical Officer at Yo-Uganda, a technology company which focuses mostly on fintech. But the reason I'm here is because I founded an EdTech company back in 2011 called Schoolmaster Solutions. We were working on solutions, technology solutions for schools. And during my time there, I learned a lot about the education sector in this country.
All right, thank you so much. And Night Stella.
Thank you. My name is Night Stella Candiru. I'm an education specialist working at UNICEF Uganda. I feel honored to be here today to discuss this topic. And at UNICEF, we are a development and humanitarian UN agency mandated by the UN General Assembly to protect the right of children and to see to it that they achieve their full potential. While ensuring that children are alive and thriving, that is health, and that they are learning, that's education, and that they are safe, and that's child protection. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So I want us to start the conversation, and maybe I'll start with you, Catherine.
Yes.
Just set the stage for us. What's the space for technology in our current education sector?
For us in Uganda, the COVID-19 pandemic was a light bulb moment for many people. All of a sudden, people were locked down, and the only options they had were to access information on any platform that they had. So there's an outbreak, if you like, if you call it an outbreak, there's access to anything and everything in the areas. So when it comes to the education sector in Uganda, I feel strongly that the urban areas have the pie. They have the biggest pie of interest, of access, and of accessibility. Every Ugandan can now access a mobile phone or any gadget. They can access it. But because of the lack of infrastructure, they cannot, the people in the villages, the girl child in the village cannot thrive or cannot find themselves hearing this story that we're talking about. She's shut out completely. So I feel like we need to come to the place where we're having this conversation and say, how do we find equity? How do we find equity in digital exposures through education and learning for the Ugandan child? Every Ugandan child deserves equity.
Ronald, she mentions really strongly about equity, but I wanted us to also talk about just the technology itself. And considering that you've been in that space before, what's the kind of uptake of technology by schools, and how different is it in the rural areas to those in the urban areas?
When we started working on the idea that became Schoolmaster, very few schools had even a single computer. A few of them, the really good schools, had some, although a lot of them were basically handoffs, donations from foreign countries and so on. This was early 2000s. The internet was nothing to talk about really in this country. But over the next 20 years, we saw a lot of schools getting interested in acquiring infrastructure for IT, especially when the ministry mandated the teaching of ICT as a subject. They were forced to set up labs because they couldn't teach without that infrastructure. But that said, a lot of that infrastructure was underutilized in most schools. It was also neglected. A lot of the maintenance that was supposed to be done was not being done. And so a lot of the labs were actually white elephants.
Would we say that the perfect bet for the future of education lies in technology, advancing access to technology for schools?
That is an interesting question. And the reason is I'm a parent, and being both a technologist and a parent gives you access to, you view things quite, it's very interesting. Now, during the pandemic, my own observation was that technology is very useful for kids above a certain level. The ones who actually have that motivation to and discipline, maturity, to actually consume that the content being delivered by technology. But below a certain age, it is still necessary to have that human touch.
All right. Night Stella, I want to bring you in on the conversation on equity. The access to technology has increased the inequalities that we already had in society. The rural areas, for example, do not have the same access to technology as the urban areas. But even more fundamentally, technology access across gender, the gender divide. In the schools that you go to, you find that boys have more access to technology than the girls do. How do you address these inequalities so that access to both education opportunities equal for all of them?
I would like to respond to you looking at the systems approach to all this. Luckily and thankfully, I would like to say, because we've been in this space for a while advocating with ministry, of course, including other partners, for the ministries to establish and develop a policy, EdTech policy for the sector. That now gives very fertile ground for what was always a bottleneck to supporting EdTech initiatives in various angles. However, to get to your point of the gender, indeed very true. For instance, if I can use the example of the computer labs, you will find that parents, because of protection issues, tend to keep the girls back. Systemically, we need to address the space, starting also with the teachers, so that the teachers embrace this thing and then they are able to support the learners, and they appreciate that this is something that actually gives them a huge leap and a huge boost.
I wanted to bring Catherine in, knowing that education is a multi-sectoral sector. So if you want, for example, to change the behavior of teachers with technophobia, it might require a policy overhaul. It might also require retooling some of these teachers. What are the kinds of investments that we need to be making now in human resource and in infrastructure to sort of make technology the actual get route for education?
About almost 10 to 15 years ago, we went into a village called Mazi in Luero. And we were privileged to have a grant, but also we worked with the Church of Uganda. They donated land. We constructed what we call a multiple resource center, and we received a donation of 25 computers in there. We decided to open up the computer lab to community, to teachers and parents. Mothers who did not speak English can type. Fathers who could not use the computer can now come in and use the computer. Mark you, I mentioned we cannot access internet yet because we do not have the infrastructure. As I speak, we have about maybe 7 girls for the first time chose ICT at their HSC from Mazi village because of the interest of what they found in the community. So we're saying, okay, if you find it difficult to go to school, come with your mother to this lab and let's play this game. Let's do this disruption. So going back to you, the question is, what are we doing? Can we encourage such community centers? can we encourage? I'm excited because the government has finally vocationalized education for children. So children everywhere can access learning with practical skills.
Ronald, in terms of the investments needed, just core infrastructure, what kind of investments do we need to make? And also understanding that technology alone, just access alone is not enough. There's now equally, we need to learn things like code as a language. What kind of investments does government need to make now?
There still needs to be a lot of infrastructure investment. We do not have, adequate internet access in many parts of the country, much as the providers will tell you, we cover 90% of Uganda. But the infrastructure is probably the easier part. It's one thing to have in place the infrastructure, it's another to actually utilize it. Now, to utilize it, you need two things. Number one is the know-how in terms of human resources that know how to leverage this technology the best way possible. And then number two, you actually need the content. Of course, the content is created by those skilled people, so that's why I've started with them. Now, how do we get, people that can actually leverage this technology? It has to be a concerted effort, and it starts early. So there's so many questions that need to be answered, of which infrastructure is probably a very expensive portion, but not the hardest, so to say.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to take a very short break, but when we get back, we continue the conversation on just how can technology increase access to education in Uganda. Thank you so much for coming back to EdTech Mondays, brought to you by the Mastercard Foundation in partnership with the Innovation Village through the EdTech Lab. And today we're discussing just what the role of technology can be in access to education. Stella, when we broke off, Ronald had made some really important submissions on working together as partners to be able to make technology accessible for everyone. And I just want us to pick up on that kind of conversation. How do you, if you were to picture, how do you think partners can work together to make technology and access to education much better?
I personally come from Yumbe, up in West Nile, very rural district, but you would find that with technology, because they have a lot of refugee population with ICT centers, you find a child is able to access the same content as one in Gayaza or elsewhere. That's the beauty about it, but it also became very excluding because of the category of children that she was talking about. That's why the issue of coordination is very key, that we leverage on the space that started during COVID, and now also the education development partners, where we are participating as well, have started an EdTech working group as well. And we want to see all the different partners come in this space. But this space should not stop at the national level. It should break down to go down to the grassroots, to the districts. That is where the real work is happening.
Catherine, I wanted to bring you in on this. What would that kind of collaboration that she's talking about, what would it look like for you? How would you like to be plugged in? How would you like to change the space? Is there space for you to have your ideas adopted nationally and broken down to the regions? How would that happen?
I think for a start, if we could map out, it's good to do some research. Who's doing this kind of innovation? Who has started? Who has engaged the communities? Map out these people. For example, Innovation Village or the hub centers. Map them out. Let's get together. Who are they working with? I'm sure none of them is working in isolation. And the districts have also put out a word to us as civil society and implementers in communities. Please come. We no longer want you to work in isolation. So let's sit at the local level. Let's start there. Let's start basics. In my view, when I hear that over 10,000 girls have been victims of domestic violence and defilement. And for us as CSOs, we are registering over 10,000 who might be pregnant. There's likely to be a baby boom. That means 10,000 girls will not go back to the mainstream type of education. What are we doing in the community to say, look, okay, yes, there will be many child mothers. Can we have a center, community center, where they do not feel left out? Who is there? Who is there? Who is there? What can we do together? Can we point them to the places where they feel safe? Yes, I'm a child mother, but I don't have to feel afraid to go out. When we look at it that way, then we will put down our egos.
And get the job done. Ronald, someone would imagine that a pandemic that kept kids out of school for almost a year was a perfect opportunity for unity to happen. Why isn't it happening?
I think the most important thing for us as we move forward is to start with the basics, essentially. We don't have to, to try and look at what very advanced countries are doing in this field. We need to look at what would work for us, especially given where we are, and start from that. The government and other stakeholders must come together and invest and continue working together. Start with the basics, do research into what would be the most profitable way, the most effective way of getting technology into education, and build from there, move on from there.
I've had a lot in this conversation about the basics, but what is actually the basics for a school to get into access to education using technology?
Okay,
if
so
you recommend.
Yes, so there are various levels. The very basic level is where you're basically trying to do what you do in class and deliver that via technology. I'd say that, for instance, if a teacher creates soft copies of his notes and distributes them to his students via email, that is using technology, and that would enable the students to actually pick something. But it is not as, it's not as attractive. It doesn't really attract the kind of attention if someone, says they're using artificial intelligence to do this and do that. No. We need to start from there. Create content, disseminate it. Then from there we can move to the next level, which would be using technology to help in assessing the progress of children. So yes, you're disseminating notes. Now, can you come up with, online assessments that allow these students to actually do those assessments, and technology helps you to assess what the weak points are, and so you're able to get a lot more insights as opposed to if you are simply marking. We need to move away from looking at schools as purely profit centers to actual investments in students who will transform the country at an appropriate time.
Stella, what's the future of this conversation? Where do we go now from this point?
That space is now getting better, and the sector, most importantly, has finally embraced and seen the value of technology in this digital era, and it is clear that everything, if you notice today, everything is e-something, e-agriculture, e-commerce, e-learning. So that is the space that exists, and that's the future. We want every child not to be left behind.
Ronald, very finally, what message would you send to someone watching today who feels that technology might be the future, or maybe who has challenges with accessing technology as the future? What message would you leave for them?
We're talking about accessing technology and so on, but even if you have all the infrastructure in the world, end users will need devices. They'll need certain devices. They'll need to have some level of spending power to actually utilize and access these services. So that is something that needs to be worked on. It may call for subsidies. It may call for special low-cost devices. It may call for setting up community centers for communal access. Like there used to be libraries. Instead of libraries, can we now have community centers equipped with equipment that can be shared in case it's prohibitively expensive for individuals to access these gadgets? But there are policymakers who are watching as well. Now, they need to, to take this seriously. They need to basically revise what they've been doing, see what can they do to stimulate the sector, what areas can they invest in. Then the people in charge of the telcos, we need to encourage them to, to step out of just the profitable areas and take connectivity everywhere. If we're talking about 4G, let there be 4G in Katakwi, deep in the village, in Kisoro, in the rural areas of Yumbe, and so on. That way, we'll be able to progress as a nation.
Knight, what are your parting shots on this subject?
Since the space is now fertile with the policy frameworks on, the bigger issue now is how this translates into quality learning achievements for children at the school level, at the community level, and at household level. For instance, I would like to use very basic examples. Maybe in a whole group of young people, there is one who has a smartphone. They could come up with solidarity groups where they convene around one smartphone, they contribute 500 shillings to buy maybe data. Then at school level, maybe they have one computer, and the teachers can be supported to organize group learning either at the school or within the community, so that there are more children accessing that kind of support, and also for us to help parents to appreciate that if they don't embrace this thing, their children are completely going to be left behind. Some of them, they don't see that yet, so it's our role to help them to see that.
All right.
Thank you.
Parting shots, Catherine?
Thank you. I would like to encourage, she has summed it up for us really well, and he has also given us the foundations. But I would like to see us doing collective work and advocating wherever we go, to advocate for embracing technology as an opportunity for us to access learning, knowing that learning transcends our boundaries. But I'm hoping that Uganda will not be left behind, because by the time we start to embrace, there will be new technology, there will be new things. But the principles, I hope that we can even wake up one day as Uganda and we create our own technology and our own devices that we can make. And so I'm excited to see the future for just girls and young women and all boys and girls in community.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Of course, this conversation is not stopping at the Mastercard Foundation. In partnership with the Innovation Village, the EdTech Mondays will continue, and we will continue to have more conversations about the education space and the technology space and just how better they can get. Thank you so much for our viewers, and thank you so much, our panelists, for joining us today. Have yourselves a good day.